She was still wiping her eyes when the ceremony stopped. Lily Harper had pressed herself into the corridor outside the Caldwell Estate's main hall, the narrow service corridor that smelled of old stone and the floral overflow from 200 arrangements of white roses, and let the tears fall where she believed nobody could see her. She had made it this far. Third wedding of the weekend. 12 hours into a shift that had started before sunrise and would end after midnight if the reception ran long. Her feet had stopped communicating specific information 3 hours ago and had moved on to a general broadcast of misery that she had learned to receive and ignore. She could handle the feet. She could handle the champagne flutes that had to be reset after Victoria Caldwell snapped at her in front of 200 guests for placing them a half-inch out of alignment. Snapped in the specific carrying voice of a bride who wanted witnesses and found them. She could handle the way the other guests had looked at Lily in the specific way of people who have decided that the person being corrected must have deserved it. She could not handle the bridal suite. Victoria had grabbed her wrist. Hard. Yanked her close enough that Lily could smell the floral perfume and the champagne and the specific heat of someone who believed the world existed to confirm their importance. And she had said, in a voice that was not performing for an audience but was simply stating what she believed to be true, "Women like you exist to serve women like me." Lily had said nothing. She had learned, over 2 years of catering the Caldwell family's private events, that saying nothing was the only option available to a person in her position. She had set down her tray. I walked into the corridor. Let the door close behind her. And now she was standing against the old stone wall with her hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes producing tears she had no time for, because the ceremony was starting in 4 minutes and she needed to be positioned near the service entrance with champagne for the post-ceremony reception toast. She pressed the back of her wrist against her eyes. One breath. Ew. She had her mother's medical bills in her bag. Not literally, but they were present in the specific way that large, unresolvable financial obligations were present, which was constantly in every room at every event during every hour of every shift. The bills were why she was here. The bills were why she said nothing to Victoria in the bridal suite. The bills were why she could not afford to lose this contract. She was almost composed when she heard the ceremony start. The officiant's voice carried through the main hall doors, warm, ceremonial, building toward the specific solemnity of a moment 200 people had dressed up to witness. Lily straightened her uniform, prepared to move back to her position. Then silence. Not the silence of a ceremony pausing for effect. A different silence. The specific quality of a room full of people who have had their collective breath interrupted by something they did not expect. Then a voice. Not the officiant. Not yet. 2 words. Level. Unhurried. Carrying through the closed doors the way certain voices carried through walls. Not by volume but by weight, the specific authority of someone who had spent their life saying things once and having them received. Lily stood in the corridor and listened to the silence that followed those 2 words. It was the largest silence she had ever heard. It had edges and depth and the specific quality of 200 people processing something they had no category for. She opened the service door 1 inch. A man was standing in the center of the aisle. Dark suit. The kind of face that geography and decisions had built rather than genetics alone. Specific, deliberate, the face of someone who had assessed every room he had ever entered and found each one manageable. He was not looking at the officiant or the groom or the Caldwell family assembled in the front rows. He was looking at Victoria's father, Richard Caldwell, who had gone the specific color of a man who has just understood that his plan has developed a significant complication. 2 words had stopped a ceremony. Who was this man? What did Richard Caldwell owe him? And why, had he been watching a service corridor through a door left slightly open? Because he had been watching. Lily understood this with the bone certainty of someone who had spent 2 years learning to be invisible. He had seen her. He had seen what happened. And then he stood up in the middle of a ceremony and said 2 words that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with Richard Caldwell. Or did they? She pressed her hand flat against the old stone wall. The rose smell was overwhelming here. Her eyes were dry now. Her hands were steady in the specific way that her hands always found steadiness when something required it. She had no idea what was happening. She had the specific feeling, the one she had learned to trust over 2 years of paying attention in rooms where nobody thought to pay attention to her, that she was standing at the edge of something much larger than a wedding. He was right. Liam Cross had not wanted to attend the Caldwell wedding. He attended problems. Weddings were incidental locations where problems occasionally presented themselves, which was the only reason he was seated in the third row of the Caldwell Estate's main hall watching 200 people perform their investment in an event that was, from Liam's specific vantage point, a financial instrument disguised as a celebration. Richard Caldwell owed his organization $4 million. The debt was 14 months old, had been restructured twice, and had been described in the most recent communication from Caldwell's attorney as pending resolution through a family transaction that would settle all outstanding obligations. The wedding was the transaction. The groom, Tyler Weston, came from a family whose real estate holdings were, on paper, sufficient to absorb the debt through a marital asset consolidation that Caldwell's lawyers had structured with considerable creativity. Liam had come to confirm the transaction was proceeding as described. He had been in his seat for 40 minutes, managing the specific patience required of a man attending an event he had no personal interest in, when his peripheral attention caught movement in the corridor, the service door slightly ajar, a woman stepping through it and pressing herself against the wall. He watched through the gap without turning his head. Professional habit. He watched the woman press the back of her wrist against her eyes. Watched her absorb something in the specific way of someone who had been absorbing things for a long time and had developed a practiced method. He had also watched what preceded it. His seat position gave him a partial view of the service corridor, and 20 minutes earlier he had seen Victoria Caldwell pull a waitress by the wrist into the bridal suite with the specific grip of someone exercising a power they had never questioned. He had not been able to hear the words. He had seen the waitress come out alone. He looked at the ceremony program. The waitress's catering company was listed in the vendor acknowledgments. Harper Catering Services, Lily Harper, proprietor. He looked at Richard Caldwell in the front row. He thought about $4 million and a debt restructuring that was being executed through a marriage that was supposed to happen in the next 4 minutes. He thought about the corridor. He stood up. He walked to the center of the aisle and said 2 words that were not primarily about Lily Harper, and were also not entirely unrelated to her. He said them because Richard Caldwell's face when he saw Liam standing in his daughter's wedding ceremony would tell him everything he needed to know about whether the transaction was proceeding as described or whether something had changed. Richard Caldwell's face told him immediately that something had changed. Now Liam was standing in the aisle while 200 people held their breath, and the officiant looked at him with the expression of a man who had never encountered this specific situation and was discovering that his training had not covered it. The groom, Tyler Weston, had gone the specific color of someone whose signed documents were about to become relevant in ways he had not accounted for. "Mr. Caldwell," Liam said. "Level. Carrying." The voice that had resolved a significant number of situations that had initially appeared unresolvable. "I'd like a brief conversation before this proceeds." Richard Caldwell stood. "This is my daughter's wedding." "Yes," Liam agreed. "And when it's complete, certain assets will have been transferred from your control to your son-in-law's, which will affect your ability to fulfill prior obligations." He held Caldwell's gaze. "I'd like to discuss that before the transfer occurs." The silence in the room was enormous. 200 people were discovering simultaneously that the event they had dressed for was more complicated than they had been told. Victoria Caldwell, standing at the altar in $40,000 of silk, turned to look at her father with an expression that contained, beneath its surface fury, a flicker of something that looked like knowledge. She already knew something. What did she know? Liam's attention moved briefly to the service door. Still slightly open. He could see a sliver of the corridor. The waitress, Lily Harper, was standing there, looking through the gap. Her eyes were dry now. Her expression was the specific composed attention of someone who was paying close attention and trying not to show it. He was not afraid. He was watching. He turned back to the room. "Mr. Caldwell." 5 minutes. Richard Caldwell came down from the front row with the walk of a man performing composure for an audience he knew was watching. Liam followed him into the east anteroom, which smelled of old wood and the nervous sweat of a man who had just watched his plan develop a significant complication. The conversation lasted 7 minutes. What Liam learned in those 7 minutes changed the shape of the evening. The asset transfer had been structured differently than disclosed. Tyler Weston had signed documents the previous night that shifted not just marital assets but 4 separate holding companies into his control. Companies that were, Liam had just confirmed from Caldwell's panicked confirmation, the exact vehicles containing the assets that backed the $4 million obligation. The wedding was not a financial handshake. It was an asset shield. And somewhere in this building, serving champagne to 200 people, was a woman who had worked at this family's private events for 2 years. Who had been in rooms where things were discussed. Who had been invisible enough that nobody had thought to guard their conversations. Liam went to find the kitchen. The catering kitchen smelled of warmed appetizers and the industrial cleaner beneath everything, and the specific organized tension of a space where several people were managing multiple timelines simultaneously. Lily was at the service counter when Liam walked in, reorganizing the champagne arrangement for the post-ceremony toast that had not yet been determined would occur, because the ceremony had not yet been determined. She looked up when the door opened, then registered who had walked through it. Her hands paused on the champagne flutes for exactly 1 second before returning to work. He watched her process his presence and choose to keep working. He noted that. "Miss Harper," he said. "The ceremony is on pause," she said without looking up from the flutes. "I'm not sure what configuration we're toasting to yet." "That's a reasonable problem to have," he said. He walked to the far side of the counter and stopped there, giving her the width of the counter. "Not crowded. I have one question." She looked up. Her eyes were clear now. The crying was gone, absorbed back into the professional composure she wore with the specific ease of long practice. She held the champagne flute in both hands and looked at him with the careful attention of someone assessing whether the next 60 seconds were going to make her situation better or worse. "Ask it," she said. "3 months ago," Liam said. "A private dinner at the Caldwell family's residence on Harborview. Were you working that event?" Something moved across her face. Small. Fast. The specific micro-expression of a person who has just connected two things they had kept in separate compartments. "Yes," she said. At approximately 9:30 p.m., a conversation occurred in the dining room between Richard Caldwell, Tyler Weston, and 2 other men. "Do you remember it?" She set the champagne flute down, carefully, on the counter, and looked at him with an expression that was no longer the careful assessment of a woman managing a professional situation. It was something more direct, more specific. "You want to know what I heard," she said. "Yes." "Why?" He held her gaze. "Because I believe you were in the room. And because I believe you were not noticed. And because what was discussed in that room is relevant to a significant financial obligation that the people in this building are currently attempting to evade." He paused. "I'm not asking you to put yourself at risk. I'm asking what you remember." She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen hummed around them, the warmer cycling, a prep staff member moving at the far end, the muffled sound of 200 people in the main hall doing whatever 200 people did when a ceremony had been unexpectedly interrupted. "They discussed documents," she said. Her voice was level, professional. The voice of someone reporting information with the specific clarity of a memory that had been filed precisely. Tyler Weston had a portfolio. Richard Caldwell pointed to specific pages. The other 2 men, I didn't know them then, were described as representatives of the holding company administration. She held his gaze. The conversation referenced 4 company names, a transfer timeline, and a phrase I wrote down afterward because I didn't understand it but thought I might need to. He went still. "You wrote it down." "I write things down," she said. "I always have. My memory is good but I've learned not to trust it well enough." She reached into the side pocket of her catering apron and produced a small notebook, worn, spiral-bound, the kind that cost $2 and lasted years if you used them carefully. "I wrote it down that night when I was in the service corridor." She opened it, found the page, turned it toward him. He read it. "Read it again." The 4 company names, the transfer timeline, and the phrase, "Upon ceremony completion, full administration rights transfer to primary signatory, irrevocable." He looked up at her. "You've been carrying this for 3 months, he said. "I didn't know what it meant for 3 months, she said. "I filed it the way I file things I don't understand. In case they become relevant." She held his gaze. "They became relevant tonight." He looked at her across the service counter in the kitchen that smelled of warmers and industrial cleaner, and the specific focused quiet of 2 people who had just understood that they were holding the same thread from opposite ends. "This is enough," he said. "Combined with what Caldwell just confirmed to me in the anteroom, This is documentary evidence of an asset shielding operation executed through a marriage ceremony. He held her gaze. You understand what this means? It means the wedding is definitely not happening tonight, she said. It means more than that. He held her gaze. It means the people in this building are going to want to know where this information came from. She looked at her notebook. Then at him. The composure she wore was fully present. Not performing calmly but actually in possession of it, which was the thing he had noticed in the corridor and was noticing again now. Will they come for me, she said. Not while I'm in the building, he said. Simply. The voice of a man stating a fact. After that, he paused. I need you to trust me for the next hour. I just met you, she said. I know, he said. Trust me anyway. She looked at him for a long moment. Then picked up the champagne flute from the counter. I'm going to keep doing my job, she said. Because I need the money from this contract regardless of whether the ceremony happens. If you need me, I'll be here. He almost said something. Stopped. Looked at her, at the woman who had been made to cry in a corridor and had come back to her kitchen and organized champagne flutes and answered his question with complete precision and was now telling him she would keep working. And felt something shift in the controlled architecture of his attention. Keep the notebook safe, he said. I always keep it safe, she said. He walked out of the kitchen. In the main hall, Richard Caldwell was attempting to resume the ceremony. Liam stood in the doorway and looked at the room and thought about irrevocable transfer and 4 company names and a woman who wrote things down in a $2 notebook because she didn't trust good enough. His phone lit up. His attorney. He read the message and went very still. Tyler Weston had filed the transfer documents at 9 a.m. that morning. Before the ceremony. The transfer had already partially executed. The wedding wasn't supposed to complete the shield. It was supposed to legitimize a shield that was already in motion. They had been moving faster than anyone had anticipated. Which meant someone had warned them. Which meant there was a leak. Somewhere between Liam's organization and the Caldwell family's legal team, information had moved in the wrong direction. And Lily Harper, who had been working this family's events for 2 years, had been visible enough to be used as a target and invisible enough to be the only honest witness in the room. Both of those things were about to become very dangerous. The notebook had 14 pages relevant to the Caldwell family. Lily had not known they were relevant. She had known they were recorded, which was different. She had been writing things down since she was 19 years old and had started catering events as a way to pay for her mother's first round of medical treatment, and had understood immediately that the rooms she moved through were full of information that the people in them assumed was private because they had forgotten she existed. She had not written things down for any strategic purpose. She had written them down because her father, who had been an accountant before the illness that ended his career, had told her that the only information you could trust was information you had recorded at the time. Memory was editing. Notes were evidence. She had 14 pages of evidence about the Caldwell family's financial activities, recorded over 2 years of private dinners, charity events and family celebrations where she had carried trays and refilled glasses and been invisible enough that conversations happened around her the way weather happened, without consideration for what it landed on. She was at the service counter going through the notebook when Liam came back to the kitchen 40 minutes after leaving it. The main hall had resolved itself into a suspended state, the ceremony not resumed, the guests being managed by the event coordinator with champagne and platters of past appetizers, the Caldwell family and Tyler Weston's family in separate conference rooms doing things that involved lawyers. Liam sat down on a supply crate near the counter. Not across from her. Beside her workspace. The proximity was different from across the counter. Less transactional, more present. Show me the other entries, he said. She turned the notebook toward him. He read while she maintained the appetizer service. The 2 activities happening in parallel, connected, the kitchen smelling of warmed pastry and the cold November air coming through the service door that the prep staff kept opening. He read for 11 minutes without speaking. She watched his face from her peripheral vision, the controlled surface doing its work, but with specific moments where something underneath it shifted. She was learning to read those moments. The February dinner, he said. The 2 men you described as investment advisors. One of them had a name. Harlow, she said. The other one I only heard called by an initial, D. She pointed to the entry. That's the dinner where they first mentioned the holding companies. I didn't know what holding companies were at the time. I looked it up afterward. You researched it. I always research what I write down, she said. Otherwise the notes are just sounds. He looked at her. You taught yourself to understand what you were hearing. Over 2 years, she said. I'm not a financial expert, but I know enough now to recognize when a conversation is about moving money to somewhere it can't be found. She held his gaze. That's what they were doing in February. And in May. And at the September dinner, which is the one where they discussed the timeline. She turned to the September entry. He read it. His jaw set in the way she had seen once before, in the main hall when he stood in the aisle. One controlled degree of something absolute. The September timeline matches the transfer documents filed this morning, he said quietly. They've been planning this specific execution for at least 5 months. He looked at her. Lily. This notebook is the documentary backbone of a fraud case. I know, she said. I realized that about an hour ago. You realized it before I came back. Yes. She held his gaze. I was deciding what to do about it when you walked in. He looked at her. The thing that arrived in his expression was not the controlled assessment of a man managing a situation. It was something more specific and more personal. The particular attention of someone who has just seen something clearly for the first time. What did you decide? He said. To give it to you, she said. Because it's the right thing. And because I have enough entries in here that the Caldwell family would not be comfortable knowing I have. He held her gaze. That makes you a liability to them. I know, she said. I was a liability the moment you walked into that kitchen and asked your question. Because they'll know you asked it. He held the notebook. The question is whether the liability is more dangerous with you or without you. He was quiet for a moment. With me, he said. Simply. Directly. I know, she said. That's why I'm giving it to you. He handed him the notebook. He held it with the specific care of someone who understood what they were holding. Then he looked at her with an expression that had moved past professional respect into something she did not yet have a name for but recognized as the beginning of one. The February dinner, he said. The man called D. I think I know who that is. He held her gaze. If I'm right, the information leak in my organization, the reason the Caldwell family knew I was coming tonight, comes from the same source. She absorbed this. Someone inside your organization warned them. Yes. His voice was very controlled. Which means there's someone in my world who knew about my $4 million claim against Caldwell and sold that information to him. And D is that person. Possibly. He held the notebook. I need to make 2 calls. Stay in this kitchen. Don't let anyone who isn't catering staff through that door. He walked out. She returned to the appetizer service. Her hands were steady. Her mind was doing what it always did in difficult situations, building forward from what was true, identifying the variables, preparing for the next thing without catastrophizing about it. She had given him the notebook. She had made a decision that could not be unmade. And somewhere in this building, the Caldwell family was in a conference room with lawyers, and Tyler Weston had filed documents that morning that were now in the hands of Liam's attorney, and a person who had been inside Liam's organization had sold information to the people who now understood that Lily Harper was a problem. The service door opened. Not prep staff. A man she had seen at the September dinner, not Harlow, the other one, D, was standing in the service doorway, looking at her with the specific expression of someone who has come to assess a problem before deciding how to resolve it. She held the appetizer tray. Met his eyes. Did not look toward the door Liam had exited through. Miss Harper, the man said. I think we should talk. His name was Daniel Rice. She knew this because she had written it down in March at a dinner where he had signed a place card, and she had been refilling water glasses and had noted the name in the margin of that evening's entry because something about the way Richard Caldwell spoke to him, carefully with a specific deference that Caldwell didn't offer to most people, had registered as significant. She had not known until this moment why he had been significant. He was the leak. She could see it in the way he had come through the service door rather than the main entrance. The specific movement of someone who understood service corridors and had chosen this route deliberately. Someone who had been in this building before, through these doors, in the invisible spaces where the staff moved. I don't think we have anything to talk about, she said. She kept her hands on the tray. Kept her voice level. The kitchen smelled of the warmer cycling and the prep staff at the far end who had not yet registered what was happening near the service door. I think you have a notebook, he said. And I think you've just given it to someone who is going to cause a lot of problems for a lot of people. He stepped into the kitchen. One step. Deliberate. The step of a man demonstrating that he had decided to enter rather than asking. I'd like to discuss whether that decision was wise. She set the tray on the counter. Freed her hands. I'd like you to leave my kitchen. It's not your kitchen, he said. Tonight it is, she said. I have a contract. He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has assessed a woman and determined she is the least significant obstacle in his current situation. She recognized the expression. She had been receiving versions of it for her entire working life. It had never been accurate. The notebook, he said. However many entries you think matter, they're written by a waitress. A catering staff member. There's no court in this city that's going to weight a waitress's handwritten notes against. The service door opened behind him. Liam crosswalked through it. He took in the scene in approximately 1 second. Rice, the kitchen, Lily's freed hands, the distance between them. His expression did not change. The controlled surface was entirely present. What was not present, for the first time since she'd met him, was any of the warmth that had been arriving underneath the surface across the last 2 hours. Rice, he said. The name landing with the specific weight of a word that was simultaneously a greeting and a conclusion. Rice turned. The color in his face underwent a specific shift. Liam. Don't. One word. The kind that closed conversations. Liam walked past Rice without touching him and positioned himself between Rice and Lily with the specific unhurried movement of someone who had already decided where they were going to stand. Whatever you came here to say to her, you've said it. Now you're going to come with me. Rice looked at Lily. Then at Liam. You don't have evidence of. I have a notebook with your name in it from March, Liam said. I have a phone record that my attorney pulled 20 minutes ago showing a call from your personal device to Richard Caldwell's attorney the morning after I informed my senior staff that I would be attending this event. He held Rice's gaze. I have enough. Come with me. The kitchen was very still. The prep staff at the far end had stopped moving. The warmer cycled. The November cold came through the service door that was still open behind Rice. Rice looked at Lily once more. The assessment in his expression had changed. She was no longer the least significant obstacle. She could see him understanding, the element he had most significantly underestimated. 2 of Liam's security came through the main kitchen door. They positioned themselves without drama. Rice went with them without making it worse than it already was. The kitchen exhaled. Lily picked up the tray. Returned to the appetizer arrangement with the specific automatic movement of someone whose hands found useful work during significant moments. Liam stood at the counter. She could feel him looking at her without looking up to confirm it. He came here to intimidate you, Liam said. I know, she said. You weren't intimidated. I don't have the bandwidth for intimidation, she said. I have appetizers to manage and a ceremony that may or may not resume and a contract I need the payment from. She looked up. Are you all right? He looked at her. I'm not the one who was just. I know, she said. I'm asking anyway. Something moved across his face. The specific expression of a man who has been asked about himself by someone who is genuinely asking, and who has not been asked that in longer than he would choose to measure. No, he said. Not entirely. He held her gaze. Rice has been in my organization for 7 years. I trusted him completely. I'm sorry, she said. And meant it because she knew what it cost to discover that a person you had given years to had been building something else with them. He held her gaze for a long moment. How do you do that? Do what? Stay composed through everything, he said. The bridal suite. The corridor. Rice just now. He looked at her steadily. Most people would have left hours ago. My mother's medical bills don't pause for hours, she said simply. Then softer, and I learned a long time ago that composure is the only thing I have complete control over. Everything else can be taken. Composure is mine. He held her gaze with the specific undivided attention she had been cataloging across the evening. The attention of a man who was paying attention not because it was useful but because something in him had decided this specific person was worth it. The ceremony, she said. What happens now? The ceremony doesn't happen, he said. The documents Tyler signed this morning are now part of a federal asset inquiry that my attorney filed 45 minutes ago. The accounts are being frozen. He paused. Victoria Caldwell is in a conference room being told that the marriage she just attempted to complete was built on a fraud case that is now federal. Lily thought about the bridal suite. Women like you exist to serve women like me. About the wrist grip and the specific heat of someone who had never questioned their power. How much did she know? Lily said. Enough, Liam said. Not everything. Enough. She nodded. Picked up the appetizer tray. I need to keep working, she said. I know, he said. He didn't leave the kitchen. She didn't tell him to. They were the last two people in the catering kitchen at 11:45 p.m. The event had dissolved rather than ended. Guests departing in the specific subdued energy of people who had attended something they would be discussing for years but did not yet have the full story for. The Caldwell family had left through a different exit. Tyler Weston had left with his attorney. The catering staff had broken down and departed, leaving Lily to complete the final inventory and reconciliation that her contract required. Liam had stayed. Not helping, she hadn't asked him to help and he hadn't offered, which she appreciated because offers of help from people who didn't know how to help created more work. He was sitting on the supply crate near the counter, which had become his position in this kitchen, watching her work with the specific attention of a man who was not performing patience but actually in possession of it. She completed the inventory, closed the catering boxes, sat on the stool across from his supply crate because her feet had moved past general misery into a specific conversation about the evening that she needed to sit down to have. Tell me something real, she said. Not about the case. He held her gaze. What do you want to know? Why did you stay, she said. In this kitchen. You handled rice, your attorney is handling the documents, your organization's situation is resolving. You didn't need to stay. No, he agreed. So why? He looked at the counter for a moment. Then at her, with the expression that had been arriving with increasing frequency across the evening. The one where the controlled surface was entirely absent and what remained was simply direct. I watched you through that corridor door, he said. After the bridal suite. You were standing against the wall with your hand over your mouth and you were not going to let it reach your face. Whatever it was, you were not going to let anyone see it. He held her gaze. And I understood that you had been doing that for a very long time. Absorbing things. Not letting them show. Showing up anyway. She held his gaze without responding because the response that wanted to arrive was too large for the kitchen and she was still managing its size. I stayed because I wanted to see what you were like, he said, when you weren't managing something. I'm always managing something, she said. I know, he said. I'm the same. Pause. It gets very quiet inside it. She looked at him. At the man who had stood in an aisle and stopped a ceremony with 2 words and walked into a kitchen and asked one question and had been here, consistently, across an evening that had asked more of both of them than either had planned for. Victoria said women like me exist to serve women like her, Lily said. Not for sympathy. Stating it the way she stated everything. Directly because direct was the only language she trusted. And I've been told versions of that my whole professional life. Not always in words. In the way people look through you. The way conversations happen around you is like your furniture. She held his gaze. I write everything down because it's the only way to confirm that what I experienced actually happened. That I was actually in the room. You were always in the room, he said. I know that now, she said. Tonight confirmed it. Tonight confirmed that the most important person in that building was the one carrying the tray, he said. The notebook, the entries, the March dinner, the September timeline. None of it exists without you paying attention for 2 years in rooms where nobody thought to pay attention to you. He held her gaze. You didn't just witness what they were doing. You documented it with more precision than any investigator could have achieved with a wire. She looked at her hands. The hands that had carried trays and refilled glasses and held a $2 notebook in a service corridor and wrote down things she hadn't understood at the time because her father had taught her to record what mattered. My mother's treatment cost $47,000 last year, she said. I paid 26 of it. The rest is still outstanding. She held his gaze. That's why I'm in rooms like this. Not for the cruelty of it. Not for the invisible feeling of it. For income. She paused. I need 47,000 more than I need dignity. You shouldn't have to choose, he said. No, she agreed. But that's the room I'm in. He was quiet for a moment. The notebook, he said carefully. My attorney is going to need it as evidence. Which means it will be part of a federal proceeding. Which means you will be named as the source of the documentation. He held her gaze. I want you to understand what that means before it happens. It means I'm a witness, she said. Yes. And the Caldwell family's attorneys will attempt to discredit your records. He paused. But the entries are dated. Corroborated by the documents Tyler signed and the phone records from Rice. The notebook is more solid than most evidence I've worked with. He held her gaze directly. I want you to know that I will not let you be the person who absorbs the consequences of what they did. She held his gaze. Liam, she said. His name for the first time. He registered it, she could see it. Yes. The man called D. Rice. He told Richard called while you were coming tonight. She held his gaze. Which means they were prepared for you. Which means whatever they were going to do to manage you, having me as a variable wasn't part of their plan. She paused. They didn't know I had the notebook. Nobody knew. Which means everything that happened tonight happened because they didn't account for the waitress. He held her gaze with the specific expression she had come to know across an evening. The one that lived past professional respect in a territory she was still learning to map. Nobody ever accounts for the waitress, he said. No, she said. That's always been the mistake. He stood up from the supply crate. She stood from the stool. They were the same height approximately. She had not noticed that before. The kitchen was very quiet. The November cold had come fully through the service door that someone had left cracked and neither of them had closed. I'm going to need you to come to my attorney's office tomorrow, he said. I know, she said. And after that, he paused. After that is after that, she said. Tonight has enough in it already. He almost smiled. It was the first time she had seen anything approaching a smile on him, and it arrived briefly and completely, real, unhurried, the smile of a man who had not found many things worth smiling at and was noting that he had found one. She turned off the kitchen lights. They walked out together through the service corridor that smelled of old stone and the residual rose from the 200 arrangements that had spent the evening performing a wedding that had not been completed. The corridor was empty. The estate was quiet. The November night outside was cold and clear. The notebook, she said. There's a page at the back. A dinner from 6 months ago. 3 men I didn't know. One of them said something I wrote down that I don't think was about the Caldwell situation. He stopped walking. What was it? She told him. And Liam Cross went completely still in the corridor that smelled of roses and old stone, because what she had just told him was not connected to the Caldwell family at all. It was connected to something else entirely. Something older and more dangerous, and something he had believed until this moment was known only to 4 people in his organization. One of those 4 people had talked at a dinner where a waitress was refilling glasses. The federal investigators arrived at Richard Caldwell's offices at 9 a.m. the following Tuesday. Lily knew because Liam called her. She was in her own kitchen, her mother's apartment, which smelled of the medication and the specific warm closeness of a small space lived in carefully, making tea that her mother would drink when she woke and processing the fact that the previous 4 days had rearranged the shape of her professional life in ways she was still mapping. The accounts are frozen, Liam said. All 4 holding companies. The transfers Tyler Weston executed the morning of the wedding have been unwound by court order. They were executed in anticipation of litigation, which voids them under the statute the attorney applied. Pause. Richard Caldwell is cooperating with federal investigators. And Tyler Weston, she said. Less cooperative. His attorney is negotiating. Pause. Victoria has retained independent counsel. She's attempting to distance herself from her father's specific actions while acknowledging she had some knowledge of the asset structure. Lily held her mug. She knew. Yes, Liam said. More than some. The independent counsel is a strategy. And Rice is providing a complete account of what he disclosed and to whom, in exchange for a cooperation agreement that his attorney believes is achievable. Liam's voice was controlled. The specific control of a man managing the language around something that had cost him something personal. 7 years, he said. Then stopped. I know, Lily said. Her mother's door opened. The soft sound of her mother moving through the apartment, the specific slow morning rhythm of someone for whom mornings had become careful. Lily held the phone and watched her mother settle into the kitchen chair that faced the window and the narrow strip of morning light that came through it. "The notebook," Lily said. "The page at the back is being handled separately," Liam said. "The information on that page relates to something outside the Caldwell matter. I'm not going to discuss it in detail. What I will tell you is that it confirms something I needed to confirm and has been acted on. Pause. You may have saved something significant without knowing what you were saving." "I never know what I'm saving," she said. "I'll just write it down." She heard the quality of his pause, the specific weight of a pause that contained something he was deciding whether to say. "Come to my attorney's office at 2, he said. "Formal statement. It will take 2 hours. Afterward." Another pause. "I'd like to take you to dinner." "Not a working dinner." She looked at her mother in the morning light. At the medication on the counter. At the bill on the refrigerator door that she had stopped trying to hide from herself. "The notebook," she said. "If it's evidence in a federal proceeding, I lose it. We'll make certified copies today. The originals go to evidence. You'll have complete copies." Pause. "I'd also like to discuss, separately from the legal situation, whether there is anything my organization can do in terms of the medical situation you mentioned." She held the mug tighter. "I don't need charity." "I know," he said. "I'm not offering charity. I'm noting that you have provided information that has saved my organization a significant sum and has provided the federal case with its documentary backbone. In my world, that has value. And value gets compensated." Pause. "That's a professional conversation. Not charity." She was quiet for a moment. Her mother was looking at her from the chair. Her mother, who had heard one side of a conversation and was reading the other side from Lily's face with the specific accuracy of someone who had been paying attention to their daughter for 31 years. 2 o'clock, Lily said. "And dinner." She ended the call. Her mother said, "Who was that?" "Someone who went looking for me," Lily said. Her mother held her gaze with the particular maternal intelligence of a woman who had not been surprised by her daughter in many years and was currently being surprised. "Was it a good thing?" she said. "Being found." Lily thought about it genuinely, about the corridor and the kitchen and the supply crate and the 11-minute walk from the estate to Liam's car the previous week, during which they had talked about things she couldn't now fully account for except that she had said more true things in that time than she had said to anyone in months. "Yes," she said. "I think it was." The attorney's office at 2. The formal statement took 1 hour 50 minutes and during which Lily delivered every relevant entry in the notebook with the specific precision of someone who had been preparing for this kind of accounting since the day her father told her that notes were evidence and evidence was the only thing that held. The federal attorney, a woman of 60 with the focused attention of someone who had spent 4 decades finding truth in documentation, looked at Lily when the statement was complete and said, "Ms. Harper, in 38 years of federal practice, I have never received documentation this precise from a non-professional witness." "I'm a professional witness," Lily said. "I'm just not paid for that part." The attorney smiled. Liam, seated to Lily's left, turned to look at her briefly. The expression on his face was the one she had been cataloging. Fully present, direct, the specific attention of a man who had decided a long time ago to look carefully at things and was looking carefully now at this. Afterward, outside the attorney's building in the November afternoon, Liam said, "Dinner." "Yes," she said. "Somewhere that has nothing to do with anything that has happened in the last week." "Agreed," she said. And Liam, "Yes." "The page at the back of the notebook," she said. "The thing you said confirms something. Are you all right?" He held her gaze in the cold afternoon light. "Better than I was before you told me," he said. "Which is a complicated thing to be grateful for." "I know," she said. "But you are." "Yes," he said. "I am." 1 week later, the catering kitchen of the Aldworth Hotel smelled of braised short rib and rosemary and the honest warmth of a venue that had been feeding people for 60 years and had no intention of stopping. Lily was prepping for a corporate dinner. Smaller than the Caldwell event, more manageable, the kind of contract that paid cleanly and ended on schedule. She was at the prep counter when the kitchen door opened. Liam Cross sat down on a supply crate near the counter. Not a supply crate identical to the Caldwell kitchens. A different one in a different kitchen in a different building. But his posture on it was the same. Settled, unhurried, both hands resting on his knees. watching her work with the specific attention of a man who had decided this was where he wanted to be and saw no reason to perform that decision. She looked at him. "You're going to sit on supply crates in professional kitchens for the rest of your life, aren't you?" "Possibly," he said. "They're an underrated seating option." She almost laughed. Set down the prep knife. Looked at him across the counter. "The Caldwell situation. Victoria Caldwell's independent counsel strategy failed," he said. "The documentary evidence from your notebook combined with the phone records and the cooperation from Rice places her inside the planning discussions for the asset shield. Her knowledge was sufficient for the federal case to include her." He held her gaze. "The case will take 12 to 18 months to fully resolve. But the practical outcomes are already complete. The accounts remain frozen. The holding companies have been dissolved by court order." "And Tyler Weston?" "Cooperation agreement accepted yesterday. He's providing testimony about the planning timeline in exchange for reduced charges." Pause. "The marriage will be annulled. The asset transfers are void." Lily returned to the prep. Her hands on the rosemary, pulling the leaves in the specific rhythm of someone who had done this 10,000 times and found it clarifying. "Richard Caldwell," she said, "has lost the $4 million he was attempting to shield, plus significant additional assets that the federal inquiry identified in the investigation your documentation initiated." Liam's voice was level. "He'll spend the next several years in legal proceedings that will consume the remainder of what he hasn't lost." She nodded. "I kept working. Your medical situation," he said. "My organization's financial officer made contact with your mother's care team yesterday. The outstanding balance has been structured as a professional compensation arrangement connected to your role as a documented witness in a federal proceeding. It's legitimate. It's documented. It doesn't require you to accept anything you haven't earned." She stopped working. She set down the rosemary. Both hands flat on the counter. She breathed through the specific response that arrived in her chest. Not gratitude exactly, which was too simple and too emotional for what it actually was. The response of a person who has been carrying something alone for so long that having it lifted feels like a physical sensation. "I earned it," she said. Her voice was level. "You earned it," he confirmed. "Completely." He picked up the rosemary. Resumed the prep. Let the kitchen hold the moment because some things were better absorbed in motion. "Last Tuesday's dinner," she said. "The restaurant on Clement Street." "Yes. You told me something at that dinner that I've been thinking about." "What specifically?" She looked up from the counter. "You said you'd been in approximately 400 events in 15 years and had never once noticed what was being served. But at the Caldwell wedding you noticed the champagne arrangement." She held his gaze. "You said you noticed because something felt wrong in the room and it expressed itself as an attention to detail that was out of place." "Yes," he said. "What felt wrong?" she said. "Specifically. Before you saw me in the corridor." He held her gaze for a long moment. "The room," he said. "The way it was arranged. The way Richard Caldwell was positioned in the front row. Not like a father at his daughter's wedding. Like a man completing a transaction." He paused. "It felt like a room I recognized. A room where something was being finalized that most of the people in it didn't know about." "And then you saw the corridor," she said. "And then I saw the corridor," he said. "And both things became one thing." She held his gaze. "What kind of one thing?" He stood from the supply crate. Came around to the counter side. Not behind it, beside it, the specific position of someone who has decided the counter is no longer the appropriate amount of space between them. He stopped beside her. The kitchen was warm and smelled of rosemary and short rib and the specific focused quiet of a place doing its purpose. "The kind of thing," he said, "that I've been returning to kitchens for." She looked at him. At this man who had stood in a wedding aisle and said two words that stopped everything. Not for her, initially, and then increasingly also for her. And who had sat on supply crates and asked one question and stayed through an evening that asked more than either of them had planned for and had been, in every moment of it, exactly present. "People always talk in front of the waitress," she said. Quoting herself. The thing she had said the first night, the thing that had made him almost smile. "I know," he said. "You told me that. I've been thinking about it since." "What have you been thinking?" "That the most dangerous person in any room," he said, "is the one nobody thinks to watch." And that I spent 15 years walking through rooms full of people performing their importance, and I had never once stopped to consider what was being seen by the person carrying the tray. He held her gaze. Until you. She held his gaze steadily. At the man who had found her. Had stayed. Had called on Tuesday morning with news about frozen accounts and medical balances and dinner. Who had returned to a catering kitchen on a Wednesday afternoon and sat on a supply crate for no reason that had anything to do with federal cases or $4 million debts. Lily, he said. Her name the way he had been using it since the service counter at the Caldwell estate. Specific, direct, carrying something that was not professional and not performed. Yes, she said. I'm going to keep coming back to these kitchens, he said. I want you to know that's a decision I've made rather than a situation I found myself in. I know the difference, she said. I appreciate you saying it anyway. She returned to the rosemary. He sat back on the supply crate. The kitchen moved around them with its honest warmth and its 60-year smell and the specific quiet of two people who had been through something and had arrived on the other side of it, at something that required no particular name to be what it was. The lesson was not dramatic. It arrived in the rosemary smell and the supply crate and the warm kitchen of a hotel that had been feeding people for 60 years without apology. The woman they had made cry in a corridor had brought down a $4 million fraud operation with 2 years of paying attention. She had not needed saving. She had needed one person to go looking when the tray was unattended and the room felt wrong and something in a corridor needed to be seen. Liam Cross had gone looking. And in doing so he had found the most important person in every room he had ever walked through. He had always been there. Carrying the tray. Writing things down. Waiting for someone with the sense to look. She never would be invisible again. Here is the question I cannot stop thinking about. Liam stopped that ceremony, but not only for Lily. He stopped it for $4 million and a debt that Richard Caldwell was trying to evade. Lily's pain in the corridor was real. His reasons were complicated. So I want to know, does it matter why someone goes looking for you, if finding you changes everything? Leave your answer below. I genuinely want to know where you stand. And if you want more stories about women who were the most important person in the room that nobody thought to watch, subscribe. The next story is already waiting for you.